I live in Tennessee. Me and 3 friends had been talking for a while about taking a trip somewhere outside the US because none of us had really traveled before. Just Florida vacations growing up, nothing serious. One of my friends, Jake, had an uncle who retired in Costa Rica years back and apparently owned some property out there with a house that people used sometimes, like family and close friends crashing there whenever. I didn't really want to go because money was tight for me at the time, and honestly, I hate flying. I've always hated it. I know everybody says statistically it's the safest way to travel and whatever, but it just feels wrong being stuck inside a metal tube for hours with no way out. Eventually they wore me down though, because Jake kept saying this was probably the cheapest international trip any of us would ever get to take in our lives. So I saved up for a couple months and finally went. We stayed near San Jose first, in a pretty busy area, close to bars and restaurants and all the tourist stuff. Lots of traffic, music playing at night, that thick, humid air everywhere, constantly. I liked it more than I expected to. Everybody there moved at a slower pace, like nobody was in a rush about anything. We mostly just drank, walked around, ate as much food as we could find, and acted like idiots the way guys in their 20s do when they finally get away from work for a week. Jake's uncle had this second property farther out from the city, up in a more rural area. I couldn't tell you exactly where because Jake was the one navigating the whole time and I wasn't really paying attention. I just remember the roads getting narrower the longer we drove, less pavement, fewer people. At one point, I remember thinking how strange it was seeing houses randomly tucked way back into heavy trees, barely visible from the road unless you actually looked for them. The drive took forever too because it had rained earlier and some of the roads were muddy as hell. We stopped at this tiny roadside place to grab drinks and snacks, and I remember there were stray dogs just sprawled under the outdoor tables, staying cool in the shade underneath them. The house wasn't creepy when we first got there. It was a one-story place with a metal roof, wraparound porch, screened windows, old outdoor furniture that had gone sun-faded from years outside. Trees everywhere around it though, dense and layered, the kind where you can't really see through them more than a few feet before the green swallows everything up. At night, the sounds out there were on a completely different level than anything I was used to. I don't even know what half the noises were. The first night I barely slept because everything outside sounded alive all the time, constantly. Back home, nights quiet down eventually. Out there, they never did. We spent a couple days just grilling food, drinking beer, swimming in this muddy little river nearby and messing around. One afternoon, we drove into a small town for groceries, and Jake's uncle seemed to know half the people there somehow. The night it happened, everybody else was inside playing cards and drinking. I remember losing money because I'm genuinely terrible at cards, and Jake kept accusing me of pretending to not know the rules, which was unfair because I genuinely didn't. We had music going, and the power flickered every once in a while because apparently storms out that way messed with the electricity regularly. At some point, my phone finally picked up enough signal to send texts. Service around that property was terrible. You'd randomly catch one bar in certain spots outside and then lose it again 2 steps later. I wanted to call my sister because she'd been worried about the trip and I hadn't talked to her in a couple days. So I stepped outside with my phone looking for signal, wandering around the side of the house like an idiot holding it up sometimes because somehow everybody thinks that actually helps. I eventually got one bar near this small clearing off to the left side of the property. Not really a clearing exactly, more like a spot where the trees weren't packed as tightly together. I had just heard my sister's phone start ringing when something hit my left leg. That's the only way I know how to describe it. It felt exactly like getting snapped hard with a rubber band, mixed with a sharp sting. I yelped and almost dropped my phone. My first thought was that some giant insect had bitten me because there were massive bugs everywhere out there. Something was moving right above me, branches shifting. I looked up expecting to see some kind of animal. What I saw was the scariest thing I've ever seen in my entire life, even now, years later. There was something pale sitting up in the trees just a few feet above my head. The moonlight was catching it weirdly through the branches, and for a second my brain just couldn't process the shape I was looking at. My first thought was that it was a kid, or at least child-sized, because that was the closest thing my brain could match it to.
It was staring directly at me. I remember opening my mouth to say something because my immediate instinct was literally, how did this kid get up there? Then I realized the shape was all wrong. The left side of its body, maybe the right from where I was standing, just wasn't there properly. It was missing. Part of me thought branches were covering it, then it shifted slightly and I understood. There was only one arm gripping the tree. No legs hanging down, no second arm, just the one arm and that pale face. I know how that sounds, I do. That's exactly why it scared me as badly as it did, because my brain could not make it make sense no matter how hard I tried. It looked almost tucked into the tree, pale and completely still. I couldn't tell if it was hairless or if the lighting just made it look that way. The face was thin, wrong somehow, too still, and it never blinked. People always ask me later if it was a sick kid or somebody injured, but no normal person sits like that in a tree at night, completely silent, perfectly still, staring at a stranger. And there were no legs, none, nothing hanging from the body. Then I heard a sound from it, like somebody softly tapping their teeth together. I almost slipped in the mud. My phone fell somewhere in the grass and I didn't even stop to look for it. I ran straight back toward the house yelling for Jake. I remember slamming into the porch railing sideways, trying to get up the steps fast. I couldn't even explain it properly. Jake thought I'd been mugged or something. Once I was back inside under the lights with everybody around me, part of me started questioning what I'd actually seen, but my legs still hurt. I pulled up my shorts and there was this long red mark across my thigh, almost like something sharp had grazed me sideways at speed. 3 of us went back outside while the others stayed near the door yelling at us not to be idiots. We walked back toward where I'd been standing and found my phone in the grass with the flashlight still going. Nothing was there, nothing moving in the trees at all. The branches up in that spot were thinner than I'd realized, way too thin to hold even a small person's weight. Jake pointed that out while shining his light around up there. He said if someone had actually climbed up there, they'd have snapped branches all over the place.
I didn't tell him about the missing limbs right then. I waited until we were back inside, because I was still shaken. When I finally explained exactly what I saw, everybody went quiet. Marcus thought maybe I'd seen some kind of animal with mange. Jake suggested maybe a monkey that had lost limbs to hunting traps, but neither explanation matched anything I actually saw. I know what a monkey looks like. This had a human face. By morning, I already knew I wanted to leave. Something about that thing completely broke whatever ability I had to relax there. The others kept acting like maybe I'd just freaked myself out in the dark, but even Jake admitted I seemed genuinely terrified, and he'd known me since middle school. I'm not the dramatic type normally. They wanted to keep the vacation going for a few more days. I wanted to leave immediately. Jake kept saying we'd already paid for everything and maybe I'd seen some injured person hiding out there. I told them I was serious about leaving. I was actually weirdly calm by that point, because once I get scared badly enough, I stop acting emotional and just kind of shut down instead. Jake could tell I wasn't joking anymore and stopped pushing. He said he'd drive me back toward the city so I could catch an earlier flight home if I really wanted to go. Marcus still thought the whole thing was some local kid messing with tourists. The drive back took hours, longer than before because it rained again halfway through and some roads turned to complete mud. At one point, we passed this tiny roadside cemetery with bright fake flowers everywhere and small painted crosses crowded near the road. Jake slowed down because chickens were crossing right through the middle of everything. There was an older man standing near the entrance, smoking, and he watched our truck go past the whole time, not threatening, just watching. I turned around to keep looking at him through the back window. Then Jake asked me something out of nowhere. He said, "When you saw it, are you sure it was looking at you?" I said, "Yes, obviously." He finally admitted his uncle had mentioned things in the woods near that property before. He didn't go into detail, and I'm not going to either. I asked him why he hadn't said anything before the trip. He said his uncle talked like that all the time, believed in all kinds of local stories,
and Jake never really took it seriously. I sat there in a gas station parking lot sweating through my shirt despite the rain cooling everything down, looking at mountains way off in the distance, half covered in fog. The whole place suddenly felt very far away from anything I understood, like realizing you're somewhere with its own rules that nobody warned you about. I caught the earliest flight I could afford the next morning.
I was living out of my car for a stretch back in 2019. A little over 6 months total, if I'm remembering right. Everybody gets weird about it when you tell them and assumes drugs or some kind of breakdown, but honestly, I was just broke and stuck between things. I'd lost my apartment after my hours got cut at work, and at the same time, my roommate moved in with his girlfriend, so everything collapsed at once. I was still working, though. I had a job at a small storage property outside of town in Washington State, closer toward the coast. Lots of rain, lots of trees, that whole thing. I had this old Honda Accord that survived way longer than it had any right to. I worked until around 5, sometimes later if somebody moved out of a unit and left junk behind that needed dealing with. Then I'd shower at a cheap gym membership place in town before figuring out where I was sleeping that night. You learn little routines when you live like that. Which grocery stores don't care if a car sits in their lot too long, which gas stations have bathrooms open late, which parking lots get checked and which ones nobody ever bothers with. I got decent at it eventually. Most nights I stayed near busier areas because it felt safer. But every once in a while I'd get tired of the noise and headlights and random people knocking on windows asking for cigarettes or money. So sometimes I'd drive somewhere quieter. That night was one of those nights. My shift had been rough because one of the storage units had flooded from heavy rain earlier that week, and this older guy screamed at me like I'd personally caused the weather. After work, I just drove around for a while with nowhere specific in mind. I got coffee from a place attached to a gas station and kept heading north on a smaller highway lined with trees on both sides. There was this wooded park area I knew about from before everything went sideways financially. A day-use recreation area with trails and picnic tables, families there during summer. Fishing nearby, I think. At night, it sat completely empty because technically you weren't supposed to stay overnight, though there weren't any gates blocking it, at least not back then. I pulled in around 9:30 or 10. The parking area wasn't huge, room for maybe 15 or 20 cars, and it curved slightly around these tall trees, so parts of it disappeared into darkness fast once you got away from the entrance. There was one old bathroom building there, concrete walls covered in graffiti. I could hear water somewhere nearby. I reclined my seat and watched stuff on my phone for a while to burn time before sleeping. I used to do that every night because otherwise you just sit there thinking too much. Around 11, something moved past my windshield. A person cutting through the parking lot. It felt strange immediately because she was moving fast, the way somebody moves when they're trying to not panic. A young woman, dark hair, light gray hoodie, and she kept looking back behind herself while she walked. She crossed in front of my car without noticing me at first because my windows were fogged up and I had the interior lights off. She looked terrified. Not the kind of scared where something startled you, the kind where something bad is actively happening and you're trying to hold yourself together. She stopped near the trail entrance for a second and looked back toward the parking lot entrance again. I was thinking somebody might be chasing her. I almost rolled my window down and asked if she was okay, but when you live in your car, you get careful about involving yourself in things. Something felt off enough that I sat up fully instead of trying to sleep. She disappeared into the trees. Then another person showed up, an older woman coming from the opposite side of the lot near the bathrooms. I had no idea where she came from because I hadn't seen another car arrive. She was walking slower than the younger woman had, but scanning around constantly like she was searching for something. She wore a long, dark coat that looked expensive compared to everything else around that area. Her hair was blonde, or maybe gray, hard to tell in that light. She spotted my car eventually and walked close enough that I got nervous she was going to knock on the window. Instead, she stopped about 10 feet away. She asked if I'd seen a girl come through there. I cracked the window because pretending to be asleep at that point would have been obviously weird. Her voice sounded calm,
but forced calm, like the kind people use when they're actually angry and covering it up. I said, "Yeah, she went toward the trail a few minutes ago." The woman nodded fast and said her daughter had gotten upset and run off.
I don't know why, but I didn't believe her. It wasn't one specific thing, just the whole feel of it. The younger woman had looked scared in a completely different way than someone who'd just argued with family. The age gap between them seemed off too. I asked if she wanted me to call someone because the whole situation felt uncomfortable. She said no immediately. Then she smiled at me for just a second, and it didn't look real, like watching somebody remember they were supposed to appear normal. She thanked me and walked toward the trail entrance. I watched her disappear into the trees behind the younger woman. Maybe it actually was just a family argument, and I was making it creepy because I was sitting alone in the dark, but I couldn't settle down after that. I moved from the reclined position to sitting upright, watching the trail entrance through the windshield. About an hour later, headlights pulled into the lot. Modern, expensive-looking ones. They swept across the trees and lit up the whole parking area for a second before stopping about 4 spaces from me. A black SUV, newer model, clearly expensive. I noticed cars a lot during that period because when you live in one, you become weirdly aware of everybody else's too. This thing looked completely out of place there. Clean, polished, probably worth more than everything I owned combined. The engine stayed running for a minute before 3 people got out. One was the older woman, the second was a guy around 30. The third was bigger, and he stayed near the SUV while the other 2 argued quietly beside the passenger door. I could hear the tone from where I was, definitely angry. The older woman sounded stressed now instead of calm. She pointed toward the woods at one point. The younger woman was nowhere with them. I lowered myself farther in the seat, hoping they wouldn't pay attention to my car. My windows were fogged enough that I thought they couldn't see me clearly. But the bigger guy looked directly toward me and stopped moving. He said something to the others, then started walking toward my car. I went limp instantly, head sideways against the seat, eyes closed, trying to breathe like someone actually asleep. The footsteps came across the gravel and stopped right outside my driver's window. I could hear him breathing on the other side of the glass. He stood there for probably 10 full seconds. Then he tapped lightly on the window. I didn't react. A few seconds later, the footsteps moved away. I waited until I heard the SUV doors shut before opening my eyes the smallest amount. All 3 of them were walking toward the trail entrance now. The older woman first, the 2 men behind her with flashlights on. Nobody looked back at my car. I should have left immediately. I know that now. But I sat frozen for another minute trying to decide if I was overreacting. Because once you call police on something and it turns out to be nothing, you're just the guy sleeping illegally in a park having to explain himself to cops at 1 a.m. I kept watching the tree line, trying to catch flashlight beams through the trunks. Every once in a while, I'd see quick movement deeper in there, little flashes of light weaving between the trees, then darkness. Nobody talking loud enough to hear anymore. After another minute, I decided I was leaving. I sat up slowly and put the key in the ignition, trying to be quiet about it. My car was old though, and the engine always made this rough, ugly sound when it started cold. The second it turned over, flashlight beams immediately swung through the trees. One moved fast, straight toward the parking lot, then another joined it. My heart was going insane at that point because it was obvious they knew I was there and knew I was about to leave. One of the men came out of the trail fast and shined his flashlight directly at my windshield. I couldn't see his face because the light was blinding me, but I could see his outline. He raised one hand up like he wanted me to stop. I kept driving. He started yelling. Then I saw the older woman come out onto the trail entrance behind him. She looked angry now. There was still no sign of the younger woman anywhere. There were barely any cars on the road at that hour. Everything in my head was telling me something really bad was happening. That younger woman had looked desperate. That's the word I keep coming back to. Desperate. To this day,
I don't know what happened out there.
I moved back in with my dad in late 2021 after my apartment lease ended. My name's Riley, and I was broke. I was doing customer support work for a software company, the kind of job where you sit at a laptop all day answering tickets while people yell at you about problems you can't even fix yourself. The pay was just okay. I could technically work from anywhere though, and my dad had been asking me for a while if I wanted to come stay with him and save some money. He lived in rural Kentucky, pretty isolated compared to where I'd been before. The house, my grandparents bought it back in the 80s, and my dad ended up keeping it after they passed. My apartment before that had been near a busied intersection with people outside yelling and motorcycles going by at 2 in the morning constantly. At my dad's place, the loudest thing at night was usually bugs or coyotes howling somewhere way off in the woods. My dad worked for the county road department and left really early every morning. He'd make coffee loud as hell in the kitchen and wake me up half the time because sound carried badly through the walls of that house. I'd hear his boots on the floor and his truck starting outside before the sun was even fully up. Then I'd get up around 8:30 and start work from the little spare room near the back of the house. It used to be my grandparents' sewing room. There was still a faded square in the carpet where a table must have sat for decades. The internet was terrible. Rain would knock it out sometimes, and some days I had to hotspot my phone just to finish my shift. Most days were completely boring. My dad usually got home around 4:30. There were small, weird things around the property that I noticed occasionally, but I didn't think much of them at the time, because when you live somewhere rural, random stuff just happens. People wander around drunk sometimes, hunters cross property lines, weird neighbors show up trying to sell scrap metal or ask if you've seen their dog. A few weeks after I moved in, I started noticing tire tracks sometimes near the edge of the property by the woods. My dad said people occasionally use the dirt road to turn around when GPS sent them the wrong way. I never actually felt scared there until the day that guy showed up. My dad was at work. I was on my lunch break, and I'd taken my laptop outside to the porch because the house felt stuffy. Sitting there, eating leftovers straight from the plastic container, watching birds near the tree line. Exciting stuff. I saw someone walking up the dirt road. I didn't recognize him. He looked dirty, but not like he was homeless, more like someone who slept in their truck a lot. It was strange that he was walking because there was genuinely nothing around there worth walking to. He came into the yard like he already knew the place. That's the part that bothered me even before he said anything. I stood up automatically because it caught me off guard, and he smiled when he saw me. He asked if my dad was home, then just stood there looking at me. His eyes kept moving around in a weird way, like he was distracted by other thoughts or listening to something that wasn't there. Then he asked if he wanted to hang out with him. That's literally how he said it, not introducing himself, not explaining why he was there, just asking a random woman he'd never met if she wanted to hang out. I said no thanks, thinking he'd realize how strange he sounded and leave, but he kept talking. He said he lived nearby, said he'd seen me outside before. My stomach dropped when he said that, because it meant he'd been watching the house at some point without me knowing. I told him again I was busy with work and started backing toward the front door. He didn't get angry, but something shifted in his expression. He muttered something I couldn't hear. Then he asked if he could come inside for water. I said no. There was this awkward silence after that where he just stared at me. His face went empty all of a sudden, like he'd stopped pretending to act normal and hadn't decided what to do next. Then he smiled again and said, "All right." He walked back down toward the road slowly, hands in his pockets the whole time. I watched him until he disappeared past the trees, because something about him felt completely wrong, like something wasn't connecting properly in his head. I locked the door after he left and texted my dad. I still remember the exact message because I kept rereading it afterward, thinking I should have said more. I wrote, "Some weird guy just came up here asking for you and acting creepy, LOL." That LOL still bothers me. I knew I was uncomfortable, but I was trying to downplay it even to myself. My dad replied later telling me to keep the doors locked and call him if the guy came back. He asked what the guy looked like, and I described him as best I could. I went back to work for another hour or so. Around 2:30, I got up to make coffee because I was exhausted. I'd barely slept the night before because coyotes had been going crazy somewhere behind the house. I was standing in the kitchen waiting for the microwave when I heard a strange sound from outside, like someone messing with the front door knob. Then the door opened. The second it opened, I somehow knew it was him. I think I forgot to fully deadbolted when I came back inside. That realization hit me at almost the exact same moment I heard footsteps inside the house. I grabbed my phone off the counter and backed into the hallway. I could hear him moving around near the living room, and then I heard him talking, not to me, talking to himself, muttering like he was having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. I couldn't make out most of it, just random words that didn't connect. I backed into my bedroom and locked the door as quietly as I could. Then I called 911. The dispatcher answered, and I started whispering immediately because I didn't know where he was. I told her a man had broken in and I was hiding in a bedroom. I was trying to track where he was moving through the house while answering her questions at the same time. I heard footsteps coming down the hallway toward me, and then they stopped directly outside my bedroom door. I stared at the doorknob, waiting for it to move. He started talking again, still not to me, still that same quiet muttering like a conversation happening inside his head. The dispatcher was telling me officers were on the way and asking if I could barricade the door. I pushed a small dresser in front of it. My bedroom was tiny. Bed, dresser, lamp, closet, and that was basically it. I remember thinking how stupid it was that I'd locked myself into the smallest room in the house. The doorknob moved. He was testing it. After a few seconds, he hit the door hard enough to rattle the frame, then harder. I yelled for him to please leave. He started shouting things I honestly can't fully remember now because my brain was completely overloaded. I remember hearing "open the damn door" and something about me being rude to him. Then he kicked it so hard the dresser moved. The door was old solid wood though, heavy, probably original to the house. The frame shook every time he hit it, but it held. Then he stopped. I heard him walk away down the hallway, drawers opening in the kitchen, cabinets slamming, like he was searching for something. I still don't know what. A minute or two later, I heard sirens down the road. There was mud smeared near the bottom of the front door from his boots. My dad arrived, looking more scared than I've ever seen him in my life. Nobody was sure at first if the guy had run into the woods behind the house. There was this whole period of confusion where nothing was clear. One strange thing was that he never actually took anything. That bothered the deputies too, because it obviously wasn't a burglary. A neighbor down the road told police they'd seen a dark-colored car parked partially hidden near an old logging trail earlier that afternoon, backed into the brush so it wouldn't be visible from the road. Police found it about a mile away. The registration came back to someone with a long record. That confirmed this wasn't someone confused who wandered into the wrong house by accident. He had seen me there alone and made a decision. That's the part that still gets to me. They kept my dad updated over the following days because they still hadn't located the guy. He'd apparently disappeared after abandoning the car. Police checked nearby towns and talked to people who knew him, but nobody seemed sure where he'd gone.